Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Britton. I'm the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association. As many of you know, we launched late last year, and our goal is to have every vehicle sold by 2030 be an EV. And so this week's an important week, and I wanted to thank the Climate Group for including us as part of the U.S. Climate Action Network and the associated events that are happening this week. So as we think about transportation electrification, and how to really accelerate policy in that space, we put together a 34-point plan and 6 pillars that you can find at ZETA2030.org. So that plan is an opportunity for us to really accelerate and invest in transportation electrification. And that's good for the consumer because the consumer saves on fuel, maintenance, and service costs. It's also good for public health because as we reduce emissions, there's benefits that accrue to communities all across America. We're also set to create hundreds of thousands of jobs and really, I think, provide a catalyst for domestic manufacturing in the United States. But the thing that's most important this week is the decarbonization opportunities that the transportation sector has. It's the #1 carbon emitting sector in the US economy. And I think at Climate Week, it's especially important for us to think about how we can contribute to decarbonization across the entire supply chain. So when we think about transportation electrification and certainly the role that ZETA plays in that space, we're really lucky that we're not the only voice. We have 55 plus member companies who've made everything that ZETA does possible. But we also have other stakeholder groups and advocates that have been really strong partners and have been providing leadership for years in this space. But this week, we're especially thankful for having the administration put forward the American Jobs Plan. It is an infrastructure bill that robustly invests in vehicle electrification. It's $146 billion in transportation electrification, but there's also a host of other domestic manufacturing investments that will really make electrification possible. It'll really secure the supply chain and put us in a position to really be successful as we seek to create jobs and decarbonize the transportation sector. So with permission from the panelists, I will not go into thorough detail into their bios, but you can refer back to the registration page where we've got a little more information about their careers and their expertise. But we're joined today by Joanne Covington, the Chief Legal Officer and Head of Government Relations at Proterra. The president is doing a virtual tour at Proterra today. And so we're especially thankful that Joanne has joined us, knowing that there's a lot going on in South Carolina at the Proterra plant. We're also joined by Kathy Zoy, the Chief Executive Officer at EVgo, one of the largest charging infrastructure companies in the country. Lori Giamona, who's the Senior Vice President at PG&E, one of the largest footprints and certainly the highest rate of adoption of EVs in their service area. We've got Menka Sethi, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the American Battery Technology Company. They do both material supply and battery recycling. And then we're also honored to have Deputy Secretary Turk from the Department of Energy. So in deference to the administration and appreciation for the work that they did putting forward the American Jobs Plan, we're going to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Turk to talk about transportation electrification and really what the American Jobs Plan can do to move us forward and accelerate adoption of EVs and domestic manufacturing in America. Secretary Turk.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for that kind introduction, and thanks for all the work that ZETA is doing and all of our colleagues on what I have to say is a rock star panel. So I'm going to try to keep my opening framing remarks relatively short, so I can hear from our rock star panel and learn from all of you. And thanks not only for participating today, but all your incredible leadership. It's quite impressive what everybody has been doing, is doing, and I know the leadership going forward from the folks on the panel, and Joe, you and ZETA and our colleagues in the association as well. So on behalf of Secretary Granholm, who hopefully many of you know personally and know by reputation as such a strong supporter for so many years on the transportation, the clean transportation side of things, electric vehicles and otherwise, from our time as governor in Michigan. And I can tell you she's already taken full advantage of her few months on the job as Secretary of Energy to really push this agenda in incredibly compelling ways. And I'm honored to be here to discuss the emission reductions in the transportation sector in particular, and really how we need to act with a sense of urgency, a sense of purpose, and really aggressive. This is a moment in time, especially when it comes to the jobs plan. And it's really why President Biden and this administration has laid out what I think is fair to say a historically bold jobs, infrastructure, and climate plan and put it on the table. One that will require, and I will emphasize this, and I suspect many of our other panelists will emphasize this, robust collaboration and partnership across the federal government, across the agencies of the federal government, but with the 50 states, with mayors, with local leaders, with businesses, with the full range of actors that are needed to be successful if we're going to achieve the real potential of zero emission vehicles going forward. A cornerstone, of course, of this infrastructure and jobs and climate plan is transforming and electrifying our transportation system. And we're doing this for a number of reasons. And I suspect, again, our panelists will get into that. It's not only minimizing harmful emissions, air pollution emissions, CO2 emissions, improving vehicle efficiency, decreasing our reliance on petroleum, growing our economy, growing good union jobs, and leading the world, and really having the US leading the world in this space. I also say we're incredibly blessed here at the Department of Energy, not only to have phenomenal leadership by our Secretary Granholm on these issues, but also with Kelly Speaks Bachman and our whole energy efficiency and renewable energy team. It's a team Kathy Zoy is very familiar with, having led that team not too long ago. And I have to say, as part of the transition team for the Biden and Harris transition, when we met with the ER team, the transition team comes in even before Inauguration Day, meets with the various teams, tries to get a sense of what they're working on, tries to get a sense of what they could be working on in the new administration, and provides ideas and thoughts for the new administration. I can tell you that meeting with Kathy's former ERE colleagues was one of the most inspiring meetings I've ever had. It's a phenomenal group of colleagues who were so eager to be supported, to be empowered, to really go run with it on transportation, but on buildings, on efficiency, and all that they work. And so Kelly and her team are incredibly, we're incredibly lucky to have all of them. What I thought I might do is just very quickly focus on a little bit of context of what we've done in recent years on the electric vehicle side, what we're doing right now, and then what we're planning to do with the American Jobs Plan, and hopefully useful context for the discussion today. First of all, we've spent, certainly at the Department of Energy, but others domestically and internationally have spent a lot of time and effort on driving down costs and ensuring infrastructure, sufficient infrastructure, especially battery charging stations. On the R&D and the driving down costs, it's quite remarkable what we've done. And I think it's useful just to emphasize or re-emphasize or restate that. An impressive 85% reduction in battery cost and performance, lithium ion battery pack in particular. So going from 1,000 kilowatt hours to 144 kilowatt hours, dollars per kilowatt hour. Incredibly impressive, 85% cost reductions. But we need to do more. We need to do more. We can do more, and we're certainly pushing to do more on our end, taking that $144 per kilowatt hour down to $80 per kilowatt hour, and continuing to push those levers, continuing to make those improvements. And we need to do that to make this technology accessible to everyone. We need to make this accessible to a variety of communities, a variety of price points across the country. There are also benefits of saving $6,000 on lower maintenance and repair costs over the life of an EV costing the consumers half as much to fuel, savings of $600 by some estimates on an annual basis. As a personal disclosure, I was living in Paris, France without a car at all for several years. And now when I've moved back to the US, the first thing I did was actually buy an EV. So I am now an EV owner. And I have to say, not only the cost savings, feeling good about what you're doing for the broader world around you, but EVs are incredibly quiet, incredibly fun to drive as well. So personal attestation there in terms of the momentum on the EV front. We're doing an awful lot right now as well, not just on the cost reduction R&D side of things, But also, we announced $64 million for expanded infrastructure relating to EVs, focusing on place-based demonstration that can lower barriers to adoption, such as car sharing, such as installing charging stations with multi-unit housing. We're also focused on transport of medium and heavy duty vehicles as well, and really focusing on that sector. A little bit more challenging, but we need to focus on that as well. Just last week, Secretary Granholm announced the launch of Super Truck 3. I don't know, Kathy, if you were involved in Super Truck 1 or Super Truck 2, but this is Super Truck 3, where we're cranking up the aggressiveness on the new energy sources for a wider range of electric vehicles as well. So that sets the stage for the American Jobs Plan that the president has proposed, this historic jobs plan, infrastructure plan, and climate plan, all rolled up into one. And what's in there is $174 billion to win the electric vehicle market. And notice that I said billion with a B. That's a large amount of money. That is a historically significant proposal in terms of the funding, $174 billion on the electric vehicle market. And what would we use that money for in the proposal that's before Congress right now? First of all, it's the incentives for consumers buying EVs to continue to drive that market in a way that we've seen some other countries, Norway and some other countries, really step up and do that. So there's a real demand pull on that side of things. Secondly, to build a network of 500,000 EV stations by 2030, really pushing out that infrastructure. I know we're hearing from Kathy and others in terms of the successes and the challenges and the opportunities to do that going forward. Third, replacing 50,000 diesel transit vehicles and electrifying at least 20% of our yellow school bus fleet. That is a huge amount of school buses. That's a huge market opportunity, huge improvements in that end. And lastly, electrifying our own federal automotive fleet, including postal service trucks. And in doing so, really leading by example, walking the walk, and setting the standard for governments, we hope, across the world. And we're planning to do all this in a way that ensures the benefits of this clean energy future are equitably distributed, that everyone gets the chance to participate in this clean energy future. Communities across the country, as President Biden, others in the administration have spoken so eloquently about not leaving anybody behind, but making sure that these benefits apply across the country. Doubling down on partnerships with key stakeholders, whether it's tribal communities, communities of color, HBCUs, minority serving institutions more broadly. But to be successful, we certainly need all of your help. We need all of us working together, first and foremost, to get the American Jobs Plan on the desk of the president for his signature. And we're ready in the Department of Energy to roll up our sleeves throughout the department, throughout the administration, putting in the hard work, transforming, electrifying our transportation system, building back better, again, from a jobs, infrastructure, and climate perspective at all as well. So if we all work together, I have no doubt we can unleash this world-leading transportation industries here in the US that will win our clean energy future, and also give every American a piece of this clean energy prosperity going forward. So let me stop there, Joe. And again, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and very much looking forward to learning from the phenomenal panel that you've assembled.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Turk. Well, that's a game plan I think we can all get behind, and consider us supporters and allies who are going to be blocking and tackling any way we can. And I think that really frames the conversation we want to have today, which is what are the potential opportunities that we have, and where should we be investing to really accelerate transportation electrification. And Kathy, I'm going to go to you first just because Mr. Turk had referenced you, but as we seek to scale some of these opportunities and really to drive manufacturing, what do you see from having been inside the building, whether the Loan Program Office or the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program or other EERE, Advanced Manufacturing Office opportunities that we ought to be thinking about? How can we better scale?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, let me start with what I had about $30 billion under sort of my supervision under the Recovery Act in the in the Obama-Biden administration. And that at that point, that seemed like a whole heck of a lot of money. But we're now talking about much more. What we did learn, though, in those days was that government and the private sector can work beautifully together, and that government can basically help accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy by buying down the risk of moving ahead more quickly. It's about acceleration. So, and there are a variety of tools to do that. There are tools that come through the tax code. There are tools that come through grant programs that can get administered at the local level. There are competitive grants for new research. I mean, the Department of Energy continues to be so involved in the important early stage research that we now see actually the fruits of that are being born and being witnessed and being driven around on the cars that are available on showrooms today. But that research needs to continue. So I loved David's opening. I am so excited about the $174 billion for getting more vehicles on the road and the other things that go with that. So, again, we think of it, some people think about electrification of transportation as a chicken to the egg. We see the market already off and running. And I know you guys at ZETA feel the same way. We like the combination of, we call it peanut butter and jelly, incentives to accelerate the purchase of those EVs, accompanied by some investment in putting charging infrastructure everywhere. And again, we see, our view is that there is an ecosystem of charging solutions. There's at-home charging, at-work charging. There's level 2 charging, there's fast charging. There's urban charging and there's rural charging. All of those need to be part of this program. And I have no doubt that what the administration is going to be doing with Congress is using the best tools that can leverage private sector innovation and agility with the public policy objectives to address climate, create jobs, and improve national security. Like this group of people, I mean, David was there. There's a whole bunch of experts in this that are actually helping the president execute on this agenda. And I'm just thrilled. These guys know what they're doing. And I'm looking forward to the collaboration.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, Menka, the one thing I might ask you to do is tell us a little bit about the exciting work going on in your kind of innovative material supply and battery recycling space, just from a technological standpoint. But then secondarily, you're scaling a company. So I'd be curious to hear how we might be better partnering or providing incentives to enable companies like yours to scale more quickly.
Thank you, Joe, for the question. And yeah, we're a very tangible example of the fruits of DOE investment. We've been selected for a grant from DOE to invest in our extraction technologies that we'll be applying to US claystone resources. And the purpose of that is to really scale a domestic source of lithium. The other work that we do that DOE has been hugely supportive of is to scale our lithium battery recycling technology. And we're currently building a plant. We're going through the permitting process now in the Reno metro area in a town called Fernley. It's an opportunity zone. We'll be creating 50 jobs in the next couple of years, manufacturing jobs, paying a living wage, contributing $348 million to the local economy in the coming years. And what we're trying to do is stabilize, you can't build EVs, you don't have the metals that go into the batteries and have a reliable supply of those metals. So we responded to the DOE RFI and high capacity battery supply chains, which was extremely helpful, really exciting to see. And I think where DOE and the government can really help scale what we do, it's not only on the investment side, seed investment at early stage technology development, but it's also partnering with other agencies across the federal government to look at the regulatory system that governs us. As we build our pilot plant facility, it's very clear that, for example, RCRA never really even conceived of what we do at scale and treats lithium batteries as waste as opposed to the inherent economic and environmental value that they hold, because the metals themselves don't degrade over time through use of the battery. So that's what we're doing. We're really excited. Our technology is green. I think the other leadership role that we've been really encouraged by DOE's investment in us is really differentiating between what is considered a recycling technology that's profitable and environmentally friendly. Ours doesn't use high heat processes. It's kind of next generation. So I think it'll be really exciting to see how DOE continues to support the next generation technologies that do truly address climate change while securing the supply of the metals that are critical to scaling EVs and a zero emission transportation fleet.
Thanks, Menka. Well, yeah, the recycling is such a critical piece of our sustainability story going forward. And as we know, an internal combustion engine vehicle has kind of a carbon footprint that is set as soon as it rolls off the line. EVs get cleaner and cleaner. And I think as a manufacturing process, the more that we're able to, rely on recycling, it's just going to be a great part of the EV story. Well, Joanne, one of the things, and I know, we said, the president's visiting today, you're busy preparing, but I see Proterra as one of the kind of medium and heavy duty incumbents in this space. Much of the ecosystem in EVs are kind of aspiring companies that are, doing innovative things, but you guys are a success story. Tell us what was part of your success and how you've been able to create so many domestic manufacturing jobs and what that entails.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having Proterra here on behalf of our 600 employees. I'm thrilled to share this story with you. And to tell you all that federal support for this industry has been critical for Proterra's success, and the American Jobs Plan would create 30-fold increase in what we've already seen in investments in transit. And I think that will be an enormous accelerant to the industry. I agree with Kathy on how important that is. For Proterra, our very first bus was built and sold to Foothill Transit in Southern California using funds from the Recovery Act. Over the past 8 years, there's been over $685 million that has gone into electrifying transit buses through the FAST Act's low or no emission vehicle competitive grant program. And through those investments and through those grants, we have seen transit become one of the most heavily electrified sectors in the United States. But there is still so much more to be done, Joe, because electric buses are still only about 1% of the overall transit market. But through that, Proterra employs over 600 employees. We manufacture our own batteries. My battery plant for Proterra in Los Angeles is behind me on the screen here. And we build transit buses in South Carolina and in Los Angeles. Just to pick up on what Menka was saying, one of the ways that we designed our batteries was specifically for heavy duty commercial electrification of vehicles, but we also have the whole supply chain in mind. And we are really eager to see the United States own the EV technology and the EV manufacturing space from soup to nuts, from start to finish. So we build our batteries for use in transit. They've got a 12-year life in the most punishing of circumstances. Then they are designed for a stationary storage use. And after that, they're designed to be recycled. And the materials in our battery packs, we've designed the packs so that they could be easily extracted. The idea being, if we can extract those minerals and build that recycling industry in the United States, then we are less reliant on foreign sources of extraction and foreign mining. And we can create that entire economy here in North America. So these investments, I think they've been great for the EV industry so far. They've been great for Proterra. And we think that there is far more that we can do, and we're ready to do it as quickly as we possibly can.
Thanks, Joanne. Well, I'm sure Menka thanks you for thinking ahead about making the extractive recycling easier. Well, Laura, one of the things I wanted to turn to as we kind of transition away from domestic manufacturing and maybe into some of the charging infrastructure deployment, you guys obviously have a service area with more electric vehicles, probably by volume and percentage anywhere else in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about, and I think Secretary Turk mentioned obviously some of the environmental justice concerns, and how do we build out infrastructure that assures the driver and really does it in a way that we're leaving no community behind?
Yeah, Joe, thanks for the question. Obviously we must ensure that all communities, including our disadvantaged communities, can benefit from EVs. Over its lifetime, an electric vehicle requires significantly lower fuel and maintenance costs and can be an economical option with the right incentives. Even for residents of these communities that don't adopt EVs, they'll benefit from improved air quality, greater EV deployment, particularly in areas near highways, ports, rail yards, et cetera, where poor air quality affects public health. So to ensure disadvantaged communities can benefit, we need policies that will lower the upfront costs of vehicles, which we know is one of the primary barriers for adoption of lower income customers. We need to expand accessible charging options. We need to educate customers on the benefits of EVs and encourage fleet electrification in those areas. California and PG&E has enacted policies and programs that are specifically strive to ensure this historically marginalized communities and utility customers are not left behind. In fact, at PG&E, we have over $400 million in EV infrastructure investment programs, which have specific goals to reach disadvantaged communities. For instance, over 35% of the ports that we've installed over the last 3 years through our level 2 programs have been in disadvantaged communities, in workplaces and multifamily dwellings, so that we are providing more access to infrastructure. And then in addition to that, we're doing much more around education and ensuring that we're working with businesses and partners to ensure that infrastructure gets built in those areas so that range anxiety doesn't become an issue. But we do know that we can't meet these standards alone. And it's not just a PG&E and California issue. We think there's a great opportunity to partner with the federal government to ensure that the incentives are robust enough for these communities and these customers specifically to take advantage of this great new technology and opportunities.
Thanks, Lori. Well, Kathy, I know sequencing the investment and the capital build out is important, and you guys have a footprint where you're seeking to do that all across the country. I guess maybe I'd turn it to you, Kathy, to talk a little bit about what you envision the breakdown being between level 2 and direct current fast charging. And then I'd invite Secretary Turk to jump in on the 500,000 vehicle chargers that the administration is committed to help put a little more color to, where we should be thinking about the highest value investment for charging infrastructure.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. So EVgo is most known for our fast charging network. So we're the largest public fast charging company in the country with over 800 locations. With that said, what our philosophy is that you should deploy the charger that fits the dwell time of that location. So for at home, for overnight charging, for in apartments, level 2 is a perfect thing. For workplaces where people are going to be there all day long, level 2 is just the right thing. We are in grocery store parking lots, shopping centers, but interestingly, those with the rise of EVs, those partners of ours, those site hosts are asking us, can we also have some level 2s for our employees? So what we're going to want to do is deploy the right charger technology for the right amount, for the right use case. When it gets to, so the vast majority, I think we're going to have level 2 chargers. I mean, of the 500,000, I'll let David comment on it, but my expectation would be, in terms of sheer ports, we're going to need more level 2 ports, right? 30% of Americans right now don't have access to at-home charging. Like, I live in an apartment in Santa Monica. We don't have chargers for the residents in our basement yet, right? So that's a huge opportunity for level 2s. At the same time, people ought to be able to charge while they do other things. We ought to be able to plug in while we grocery shop, plug in while we go get a coffee. I mean, you can see the station that's behind me on the screen here is a public charging station in Sacramento, where people are going to play in the park while the car charges. So there are various use cases that we want to deploy the right technology for the right amount of time that people are going to be in a particular location.
Thanks, Kathy. Secretary Turk, did you want to comment on the 500,000 chargers and what you guys are envisioning?
Yeah, happy to come in on that, Joe, and mostly just to agree with Kathy. I think she put it incredibly well, as she always does. And I think what we need to do is really be smart here. We need to think through where are we at now, where do we want to go? Having the chargers that we need in different locations. It may not be the same answer everywhere, right? Depending on what that use case is. And I think we need to be thinking about that. And again, be smart with our infrastructure investment along those lines. I also think we need to very much keep in mind the consumer's psyche, right? And to have that comfort level increased to where we can reach those tipping points. And we're starting to see those tipping points in some countries that have really been aggressive on the EV front. And I'm a firm believer in the tipping point kind of theory of things, right? If you get that comfort level, if you get, in my neighborhood, I was not the first electric vehicle owner. There were 2 other electric vehicle owners, and they were raving and they become evangelists, and then others join that. If you get that psyche, if you get that comfort level that the charging infrastructure is there, they see it more in their daily lives, they internalize that, and their comfort level increases. So I think we need to be thinking about that psyche kind of piece to it as well, and ideally get to those tipping points as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that's in the ZETA policy platform is a dedicated electric vehicle supply equipment office to help those local leaders. And I know, both Lori and Kathy, you probably work with a lot of site hosts and potentially even those state, county, and municipal leaders. But Lori, maybe I'd turn to you to talk a little bit about what you think is most helpful. As you know, we've got communities that are seeking to make investments that will last for the next 25 or 50 years. And these local leaders are looking for help and some guidance from people who have done it before. Give us a sense of what you're doing in your service area to help those local leaders.
Thanks. This is really where the true partnership comes together. For years, we've been working with our local communities on areas of energy efficiency and clean energy. And now with the advent of electric vehicle infrastructure coupled with electrification of the buildings in California, we're starting to have those, well, we've been having those conversations. They're certainly accelerating throughout California. But because utilities are largely infrastructure companies to support electrification, starting those conversations and having thoughtful planning sessions collectively is what's going to be really important. We spend a lot of our time with cities and communities really understanding their sustainability plans, what their goals are and objectives they're trying to drive, and then partnering with them on solutions that are going to have the biggest impact for their communities as it aligns with their sustainability programs. But we're seeing cities, counties, both on the public and private sector really start to lean into the need for infrastructure, and then more importantly, really in support of customers and starting that education with customers. So we're seeing a great growth, especially around school buses, infrastructure within counties, infrastructure within the states. And then, as I mentioned, on the private sector, we're starting to see businesses really start to lay out their long-term plans for fleet electrification.
Joe, if I might jump
Please.
in as well. Look, we EVgo, we love our partnership with PG&E. I mean, we've obviously, most of the EVs are in California, and PG&E is one of our fabulous partners, and we've been at it together for a long time. One of the things that we now talk about is the creation of a charger ecosystem flywheel, and that is not just the charging company. It takes EVgo somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks to deploy a station like the one that's behind me, right? It's pretty straightforward. It takes us 9 to 12 months typically to get the whole thing done, though. And that's because there's an ecosystem of interested parties, from the site host, where we're actually going to put these chargers, whether it's a public park or whether it's a grocery store parking lot, the local utility, like where we're working with Lori and her colleagues to make sure that if there's a service upgrade that's done, that the permits are well, that there's a utility easement. The state government is involved as well, because there are grant programs. And again, with the Biden administration, if the grant money ends up getting allocated to state energy offices, as we did in the Recovery Act, then the state government partnerships are very, very important. The fourth part of what we would call the charger ecosystem, when we want to create this flywheel, is local government. And again, Lori was just mentioning that the permitting, you have to pull a permit, you have to get permission. You may even have to put certain plants around the chargers. All of that is a local, and there's no playbook for it yet. And then finally, the equipment supply. Are we getting enough equipment? And this gets into what Menka was referring to. We need to make sure that we've got all of this, not just the cars, but all of the charger equipment itself. And when I think about this, and again, this is sort of, David might recall this, during the Obama-Biden administration, we started a program called Sunshot. And Secretary Chu at the time had this idea, we want to get solar down to $1 a watt installed by 2020. And I said, oh, I think we can do it by 2017. He said, Kathy, no. Anyway, guess who was right on that one? We did get it faster because market forces were pushing it. But one of the most important things that the Department of Energy did back then is we created a playbook for siting and for all of the soft costs. Because one of the things that helps create the flywheel, it's not just the technology itself, it's not just the cables in the ground, but it's what's the process and how do we streamline that process? It shouldn't have to take a year to deploy a fast charging station. It ought to be, I mean, the fastest one we've done, I think, was in Tacoma, and it was in a period of maybe 4 weeks, like whole thing. But it can be much faster. So there's a whole bunch that we can do together to make it, to take the best practice lessons from the whole, what we've done so far, and enable others across the country to like learn from our, our early stage mistakes and be able to make it easier for everybody.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, Secretary Turk, I think one of the things that we'd be curious to hear a little bit more about from you is, EVs don't fit naturally into, there's just a lot of different buckets at DOE, whether it's the Vehicle Technology Office or the Advanced Manufacturing Office. And I think certainly within EERE, there's a charter to serve these local constituencies and help folks learn from each other to really accelerate deployment. Give us a sense of what you think the right answer is and kind of where your focus will be for the department.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Joe. And let me start where I think Kathy hit on this point earlier. And really needed to use all the tools in the tool belt here, right? And we've got a lot of tools in the DOE tool belt. A number of our panelists have referred to different programs and funding streams. Certainly the loan program, the various offices in ERE, a variety of other offices, not only within headquarters, but then most of the DOE kind of infrastructure, our national labs, our 17 national labs across the country and the universities that we work with, not just on the R&D side of things, but increasingly in the public-private space. Our Office of Technology Transfer just goes on and on in terms of the tools that we have in the existing tool belt. And very much we hope with the American Jobs Plan is the size of the tools get bigger and more powerful. Maybe they get electrified, the tools get electrified, and we have some new tools that come into the tool belt as well. As we've been thinking about how to organize all that, and certainly, good to get Kathy's advice and others, we really need to work in these crosscuts. We really need to work across, frankly, not just DOE, and I think as several others emphasized and reinforce this, we need to work with the Department of Transportation. We need to work with HHS and other agencies as well in a much more seamless way than what we've been able to do previously. Sunshot, I think, is a really good example of how we've done that before at Department of Energy, not just focused on the hard technology costs, focused on the soft costs, not just focused on our Office of Science or in ERE, the office that Kathy led, the Efficiency and Renewables Office, but also ARPA-E. And what is ARPA-E doing in the earlier stage that might be useful in this kind of context as well? So we've been trying to plan and think through what are these key crosscuts that we need to focus on like never before, and really use the tools in the DOE tool belt much more so. And this is something Secretary Granholm has stressed to us literally every day that I've been on the job after being confirmed, on the deployment side, on the near term side. What can we do on the near term, whether it's electric vehicles and the infrastructure or more broadly, with a sense of urgency? It's not something we've done all that successfully at DOE at scale, but it's something that we absolutely need to do. And certainly the jobs plan gives us those electrified, bigger tools and a variety of tools to be successful on that front. The other thing I'd underscore too, and we're very much focused on this, there's actually a White House process right now with DOE helping to lead, is on the supply chain piece. It was referenced by several colleagues. Hopefully we'll get into that a little bit more here. Really understanding the supply chains. The part that DOE is leading on is advanced batteries and understanding where the current, whether it's lithium or cobalt or the 12 or so major parts on electric vehicle and battery side of things are coming from. And not just the mining, but the processing, the recycling, the full supply chain, and capturing the wealth of those jobs, the wealth of those economic opportunities as well. And so we'll certainly very much focus on that piece as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And we'll take your cues, Secretary Turk, and maybe I'll kick it back over to Menka to talk a little bit about the material supply. And ZETA did also take the opportunity to reply to the RFI for the executive order. But Menka, tell us a little bit about the material supply chain, how important it is to secure it. And then Joanne, I'd invite you in on the manufacturing side to talk a little bit about what you guys think about in procuring those materials.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Secretary, for the great questions. We're deeply focused on securing the supply chain for battery metals, and the risks we see relate to where the critical materials come from now. And they come from just a handful of countries around the world that present some geopolitical risk because of government instability, trade practices, human rights issues, and also, environmental regulations or lack thereof. So we're focused on, creating a supply of those battery metals in the U.S. And I was encouraged to hear the Secretary's breadth of different ways we can do that, because we're known, I think, mostly for our battery recycling, but we couldn't do our lithium battery recycling processes without also having honed our extraction technologies, which DOE has invested in heavily, and we're extremely grateful for that. Because those extraction technologies can also be placed or applied to US, whether it's claystone sources, brines. So it really is the full suite of recycling and extraction technologies applied to US resources. The reason we're focused on recycling first, though, is it's the fastest. I mean, those metals have already been purified. They're already used in batteries. They don't go away over the lifespan of the battery. So why would we not lean in and recapture those metals? And through our process, that can take hours. So battery enters our recycling process and it's spit out the other end as high grade battery metals within 8 hours. So obviously that's much quicker than taking the years to develop a new supply from natural resources in the US. So that's where we're focused. We're also focused for supply chain purposes on the environmental footprint of these processes. I think that's one part that gives me most concern. I think it's really vital that we partner with environmental advocates and local communities. The state of Nevada has been really forward in its climate strategy and pulling together government and industry and communities to look at best practices, for example, for the storage and transport of the batteries to the recycling facilities, and what is the environmental footprint of the recycling process itself. So I think in addition to focusing on the technology, but also the impacts on local communities and that partnership that really needs to be in place to build support for recycling, for extraction in the US. So my fear is if we don't build the support through that advocacy and partnership, we'll pull back, and that will again make us more reliant on the handful of countries worldwide that supply the key critical materials. And there's real risk to that reliance to US companies.
Joanne, speaking of that risk, or even maybe the goals that you guys have in securing the supply chain, what's most important to you, and how do you ensure that you've got the resilient supply that you need?
Absolutely, thank you. We source over 70% of the components of our bus domestically. And we source as much as we can for our battery production domestically, both for supply security and cost reasons. Our biggest focus right now is cell manufacture, domestic cell manufacture. Our batteries are built using small form factor cylindrical cells. We do that for safety, energy efficiency. That works best for us for a heavy duty vehicle application, but we cannot source those cells domestically. There is only one location in the United States that makes those cylindrical cells, and that is captive to Tesla. So we are heavily focused on that. And in addition to creating the demand for EVs, because we do believe that if you can build it here, the supply chain will develop, there'll be private investment that comes with that. But we can accelerate that investment in domestic cell supply by opening up the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program to heavy duty and medium duty vehicles. Right now, only manufacturers and component suppliers that serve the light duty market are eligible for that over 16 billion in funds that's waiting there to be loaned. And I know the loan program office at DOE is really looking to loan that money out. And if we could make that accessible to companies like Proterra and our suppliers, we think that that would go a long way in encouraging and accelerating investment in the domestic supply chain for cells.
Joanne, that's really helpful. I do want to transition to some of the consumer incentives and how we actually derive the demand, and that's both in the light duty space, but also the medium and heavy duty. In the American Jobs Plan, there's $100 billion in rebates for the light duty. They also have, I believe, $25 billion for transit, 20 for school buses. We've actually got a question from the audience from Peter Glenn. It's addressed to Secretary Turk. It's a question that I actually am grappling with as well, which is in analyzing the new consumer incentives for EVs, we've seen the Senate introduce the EV tax credits in the form of the Electric Cars Act, Moving America Forward, Clean Cars for America, a host of ways that we get at the consumer incentive. What sort of consumer incentives do you guys envision being used to deploy that $100 billion on the light duty, the 25 for transit, 20 for school buses? Is it grants, rebates, taxes? What do you think is the most effective tool?
Well, thanks for the question on this. And let me start by making a broader point that I think is worth emphasizing, and then I'll answer the particular question. One is incentives work. And they've been shown to work in different jurisdictions, whether in the US or internationally as well. One of the projects that I helped lead in my former job at the International Energy Agency was one of our most popular publications called the Global Electric Vehicle Outlook, the GEVO was the acronym that it used. And I was struck in there by how much of a direct correlation there was between those countries that really put their money where their mouth was, the incentives on the electric vehicle side, with those EV penetration rates. Norway, of course, is the example that gets a lot of attention with, I think it's 54% or whatever their current rate of penetration on the EV side. But you can see this in other countries as well. So that's a first point. And I think that insight is very much reflected in the jobs plan more generally. Secondly, on the particular mechanisms, as President Biden has said and reinforced, having worked for him previously when he was a senator, I know he means this, just given his experience in the Senate. The jobs plan is a proposal to get that conversation jump-started and to get folks in Congress working, interacting with each other, interacting with the technical experts here at the Department of Energy and elsewhere. And so certainly be great to get other feedback, including from our panel, of where is the biggest bang for buck with these incentives. Is it from the tax credit or a rebate side of things? What are the pros? What are the cons? And again, this proposal very much is meant to be a conversation starter and to work through with members of Congress as the committees have their hearings, as the committees have their markups, et cetera, along those lines.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, well, look, I think I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with David. Incentives work, and they can come in a variety of forms. And as I think I said at the outset, creating the most important thing, I think, is to get more cars deployed more quickly. I mean, the global auto industry is investing hundreds of billions of dollars to electrify their fleets. It is the very rare, and I would say crazy car company that's not electrifying right now. So like that's happening. But what we need to, we have public policy imperatives, climate imperatives, job creation imperatives to accelerate that. I mean, look, the car industry is somewhere between 3 and 5% of US GDP. 16, 17, 18 million people are employed in the car industry. Like it's a very, very, very important sector to the US economy. So what we want to do is create incentives. Now, you know, we did have in the Obama-Biden administration, we had a cash for clunkers program that was wildly successful. That was cash. It could be a tax, you know, we have 30D right now that certainly needs to be extended so that the early movers in the EV space aren't penalized for having been early movers, that they can continue to grow the market. So that can work as well. The rebates can get administered at a federal level or at a state level. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the point is to create that reason that any buyer of a vehicle, not just very wealthy people, but anywhere you live, that you're going to want to go buy the car. And then of course, what comes with that, of course, is the incentives on infrastructure. And again, same thing. We could extend the 30D tax provision. We could have grants get administered by state energy offices. In some ways, those are just different tools that you can deploy to get to the same end. And you know, I think this is going to be a conversation we need to have Congress agree. It would be, again, ridiculous and unfortunate if this became partisan. This is about the US economy. This is about American security. This is about global competitiveness of American industry. And so we ought to all be able to come together and put the force of our shoulders behind this infrastructure investment.
Thanks, Kathy. I wholeheartedly agree. And I think one of the ways to think about this is the symbiotic nature between the tax code and the grants and rebates. So with 30D, and uncapped 30D has been the biggest driver for the light duty space, but there's a way to make up for it with a complementary rebate program, perhaps on the secondary market, perhaps for those that don't have a tax liability, or those that, you know, highly value that cash on the hood and more accelerated valuation of the credit. And then I think the same thing is true on the medium and heavy duty side. You've got proposals like Senator Cantwell, who's offering a 30% investment tax credit for medium and heavy duty adoption. But you may have cities or other fleets that would really benefit from a grant or a rebate program. And so I think that's the real importance. And I totally agree of, you know, being able to, you know, combine these two tools and really meet the use cases to drive adoption in the best possible way. Well, since I mentioned fleets, and we were coming up on the top of the hour, it's gone quickly. But I did want to turn to Lori to talk a little bit about fleet electrification, in part because there's been a lot of it that's happened in your service area. But I know that the Biden administration and the American Jobs Plan in particular is hoping to drive fleet electrification, but we also have a lot of other local leaders across the country that are trying to think through, is it right for them? So Lori, two questions for you. One is, what sort of advice would you give those that are looking to electrify their fleet? And then two, what does fleet electrification or EV adoption do for the grid itself? Because I know there's tangential benefits, you know, for your capital costs as well.
Well, great. Thanks for the question. But first, I feel like I have to lean in on David's question about incentives. We do believe that upfront incentives are a great way to enable all customers to take advantage. So as much as we can do upfront, we think will really help to fuel the market and will really help all customers, all communities to take advantage of this great technology. On the fleet side, you know, the utilities across the nation have really been focused on electrifying our fleets. We feel as though we should be a role model, and EEI, Edison Electric, has really taken a strong position in that. So come to your utilities. We're happy to give you advice. We've learned a lot on this journey because we have so much fleet inventory, obviously, across our enterprises. We're working very closely with municipalities, as I said, with local school districts, and then more importantly, on the private sector, as businesses are taking advantage of electrifying their fleet. So, you know, there's really a great opportunity to learn from some of the bigger businesses that are electrifying, and then even at the smaller sector. So we've got a number of programs underway to support fleet. And in part, it's really having that utility partner there that's ready to help, as Kathy said, be a partner to build and to be ready to help support the infrastructure both on site and then, you know, with great partners like EVgo. If you're going to electrify your fleet and you're out amongst the masses, you're going to need fast charging to support that. And so, you know, really ensuring that, you know, our partners like EVgo are at the table as we're talking to businesses about electrifying the fleet. And then obviously, you know, much like on the residential side or on the consumer side, the individual fleet, there's lower cost of ownership with EV fleets, lower maintenance, and certainly less emissions. So, you know, it's a win-win-win. We look at it as a triple bottom line, right? We're supporting people, planet, and the prosperity of our businesses by supporting electrification and fleet electrification.
Joanne, what do your buyers need? You obviously have a lot of relationships across the country. Give us a sense of what the off-takers that you work with really want to see from incentives.
Absolutely. I mean, incentives have been very important for transit, particularly incentives like the HFIT program in California, the DERA program for school buses. It's a really small program, but if there could be a program like that that allowed schools to take some of this money that may be available through the American Jobs Plan and use it to retire their diesel vehicles with an incentive to buy electric, I think that would be a huge accelerant. I love the cash for clunkers idea. That should be extended to transit buses and school buses and the like. Right now, if you use federal funds, like most transit agencies do, to procure vehicles, those vehicles have to have a 12-year life. Think older diesel vehicles, that should be dispensed with so people can, transit agencies can move faster to electrification rather than having to keep their polluting vehicles along for, that 12-year lifespan because federal funds were attached to them. So it is hugely important, especially as the price for electric vehicles now is still, the upfront cost is a lot higher than diesel. And we need to help agencies and school districts in particular be able to procure those vehicles. Just to add on to that, Joe, the other piece of it that's really important is charging infrastructure. And a lot of what Proterra does is help our customers understand what their infrastructure needs are. And we work very closely with our utility partners to deploy charging infrastructure for those fleets and help school districts and transit customers and others figure out what their charging needs are going to be. So it is something that we think about at the very beginning of a project. And it's
Great.
not an afterthought.
Thanks, Joanne. Well, we're going to go to a final question that has come up a few times. I know Samil Desai has asked about the Postal Service. A couple other folks have talked about the timing of the American Jobs Plan. So maybe Secretary Turk, I'll let you answer both of those as our final question, then I'll do a quick wrap. So basically, what's the Postal Service kind of equilibrium? What can we do there? And what are your aspirations on passing the infrastructure bill?
So on the timing of the infrastructure bill, this is a democracy, right? And so we have the executive branch and we have Article 1 of the Congress, having worked in the Congress for 8 years earlier in my career. The ball is in Congress's court right now. The president put forward what he thought was appropriate in terms of boldness, in terms of scale, in terms of the diversity of things, certainly the $174 billion on the electric vehicle side of things. And now a number of committees, and likely many of your folks are watching or reading about some of the hearings that are going on, trying to put together different parts of the package. And there's a lot of discussion as democracy and as Congress works through these kinds of things. Certainly what you've heard from the president is the urgency to move quickly for domestic market, for jobs, for economic opportunities, for competitiveness purposes. It was emphasized by all of our colleagues, right? The U.S. has a choice. The U.S. has a choice of whether we're going to lead in these sectors in these areas, or if we're going to follow and cede the playing field to others along those lines. So it's really in Congress's court along those lines. And then on the U.S. Postal Service, certainly the proposal very much is to move quickly on that front, and federal fleets more generally. And this is such a huge and terrific opportunity, as was already mentioned, to prime the pump and get as many electric vehicles as, I think it was Kathy who said, get as many vehicles as you can out there, getting people to see them and get to that tipping point as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. I appreciate that's a great note to end on. And I think we all have a lot more to do, whether it's fleet electrification or driving consumer adoption or securing the supply chain, and certainly incentivizing more domestic manufacturing and advanced battery capabilities. So the American Jobs Plan is something I know we're excited about at ZETA, and we look forward to helping any way that we can. And we'll be up talking to members of Congress. And I encourage all of our attendees today to engage and be part of their civic responsibility and duty to let Congress know what's a priority for them, and certainly hope the American Jobs Plan is on that list. The other thing I encourage folks to do is go to ZETA2030.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can explore our policy platform in more detail, which touches on many of these topics. But really did want to just say thank you once again, not only for the attendees, but also for the panelists. It was a great conversation. We hope to do it again. And thank you so much, and have a great climate week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.